It's 11:11. Make a wish. Hi, welcome back to part 2 of Why Get Diagnosed. Before we get started, I wanted to give you a little update about my hip specialist appointment. We have opted to go for the labral repair surgery. We're aiming to have that scheduled sometime in late September or early October so that it's after getting my kiddos squared away at college, but before all of the holidays. Recovery time, anywhere up to 12 months is what they said to be back to good, I guess. They were never that great, so we'll see. And here we are. Oh, we're at the conference right now. So if you're also at the Global Learning Conference, come say hi. We have zebra masks, and if you listen or watch, you know what we look like. If I run away from you, though, don't be offended. It just means I'm like freaking out about talking to somebody. That's all. Okay, bye.
Shelli, do you mind running through the list of all of our reasons for the audience, just the bullet points this time?
Yes. So here is a quick summary of the 11 reasons you should go through the process to get evaluated for hypermobility and a connective tissue disorder. It can improve your treatment strategy. It can prevent complications. You'll get the right care, maybe better care, definitely better care, hopefully. It can help your mental health. It can open up the door to a world of support services and a community that you didn't even really know was there. And when you do that, you help contribute to the future research of whatever condition it ends up being, which opens the door to emotional healing. That's number 9. You can save money, number 10. And then you also leave a lasting impact, your legacy on the community. 11 reasons.
So diagnosis truly means family and community impact. Standing up for yourself, bringing awareness to your disability, brings awareness to the community as well. So this extends beyond just one person, beyond just you. Your journey can help inform your doctors and your family. Diagnosis is disability activism.
Wow.
Yeah.
Zebra news break.
Refining the medical understanding of our condition through research is one of those benefits of us pursuing diagnosis we talked about. And the fruits of our labors as a community can be seen with some of the news. Coming from the EDS Society last month in May 2024, they announced an expert committee from the International Consortium on the Ehlers-Danlos Syndromes and Hypermobility Spectrum Disorders have started a new process they have branded, quote, the road to 2026. So the road to 2026 is the path toward an update of the old classification from 2017 of the Ehlers-Danlos syndromes. The aim of this update is to advance the understanding and management of EDS and HSD on a global scale, reducing the time to diagnosis and improving care. The work is anticipated to be completed and published in late 2026. The EDS Society has a feedback form I'll link in the show notes, and I think it would be really helpful to provide your feedback to the committee because we have so many thoughts and criticisms of the previous 2017 classifications and how we diagnose hypermobile conditions as a community that would be helpful to relay to the committee and the International Consortium as they rebuild and fine-tune this idea.
And additionally, the EDS Society has a global learning conference. And this year, the conference is in July. The theme is EDS and HSD from head to toe. And breaking news on the conference is that your favorite bendy baddies are going to be there. So listeners, if you're headed to Philly, come say hi to Shelli, Luna, and Tiffany, and
our crew.
And our crew. Yeah. our roadies.
Well, speaking of listeners, Luna got this question from a listener named Omar and thought it would be a good question to answer here today. So Omar asks, how do I convince my GP, which is a general practitioner or a primary care doctor here in the US, to send me to I always am going to butcher this, and Luna, I'm going to have to ask you to explain what this is, physiatrist, when the rheumatologist didn't have any other diagnosis other than joint pain and hypermobility?
Okay, so the first thing, let me answer Tiffany's question. So Omar asked about seeing a physiatrist, but we don't know what physiatrist is because it sounds like he's from the UK because he references both that and the GP. A physiatrist is what we here in the US would call a physical medicine doctor. He's basically answering, how do I get my primary to get me in to see the physical medicine specialist because all they said I had was joint pain and hypermobility? Well, first, to me, it sounds like all they're identifying are symptoms. They didn't really evaluate you for what those symptoms mean. So I would begin by advocating for one, treatment of those identified symptoms. So even if you're only diagnosed with hypermobility, did they mean that you have hypermobility spectrum disorder, HSD? Or did they just put hypermobility in your chart, which is really just a symptom? Either way, the treatment is physical therapy and being evaluated by a physical medicine doctor to come up with a treatment plan. This is what this provider is trained for. So I would advocate with your primary to be referred to that type of doctor to help manage your hypermobility. I would share with your primary the EDS Society provider page and the UK EDS GP toolkit as resources. They are linked here in the show notes today. Oftentimes you don't need a referral to see a physical therapist. Depends on your medical system and coverage, of course, but you may need a referral to see a specialist that's a doctor of physical medicine, and that's the one who would oversee things like physical therapy and the other treatments that go along with it. They would help evaluate your joints, your pain, and come up with a plan with you. You may also seek additional help from something called a patient advocate, which we've talked about in a previous couple of episodes, and they can help advocate on your behalf. Or a second opinion is something you can ask that doctor for if they don't seem to be helping you out. One trick I always say is, okay, can I have a referral for the physiatrist? The doctor says no. Then I want you to say, okay, can you document that in my chart? See how that conversation goes. And then if they still say, no, I don't think I'm going to do that for you, say, okay, well, can I have a second opinion on this issue? Also, the International EDS Society has a helpline for assistance and advocacy. So you can call the EDS helpline and let me know how that goes if you get stuck. Omar, I hope this helps. And I think this is a great example to our listeners today on why getting a clear diagnosis is something that is of benefit to both you and your doctor, because having an unclear diagnosis really just does a disservice to the patient and you have a barrier to care.
Thank you, Omar, for sending in that question. I was wondering, Bendy Mommas, do you have personal experiences with the reasons that you gave us today that maybe you would want to talk about?
I'll go first and then I'll let Shelli talk. I think she might still be processing. Remember how I said this is likely bigger than just you? We've talked about your family, but even if the people you are genetically related to in life are important, or even if you don't plan on having children, it's beyond just you and your genetic connections. This benefits your whole disability community, right? So being counted brings awareness just by increasing things like visibility and medical statistics. Seeking care and advocating for yourself expands awareness every time you interact with a healthcare professional. So for me, one of my personal experiences is obviously it created this community. We created this show, but I don't talk about this a lot, is that in my own community, as seeking care, I've been given the opportunity so many times to see a different specialist or different types of providers, even the people drawing blood, to educate them about our conditions. So if you're open about your disability, your self-advocacy can extend further into your community. And this affects disability rights at every intersection of marginalization that you can safely touch. So not everybody has the energy to do that or start a podcast or anything like that. For me, this is really about transmuting the pain of my family and that generational trauma I touched on. I spoke in kind of nebulous terms before, but this is something very personal in my family, and I spoke from experience. The people in my family, so many were affected on both sides by not being identified. This is the part of the conversation that I am going to put a trigger warning on. I'm going to talk about those things I mentioned earlier that might be difficult. So one of my special interests was genealogy. There were a lot of gaps in my family history, or things that weren't passed on. And for a long time, I didn't understand why there were these disconnects. And I looked, and there were a lot of early deaths. And then as I put the pieces together, now I understand better why there were disconnections. So for example, my father's grandfather died a very early death. He died at only 36. And we can look at his death certificate and descriptions of his death and understand he passed away at the age of 36 with young children at the onset of the Great Depression of an aortic dissection. And I inherited his condition. And then I looked back, and there were even more. So my grandmother, not related to that man, my child's namesake, this is my father's mother, died too young. She showed all the signs. She would have been so easily diagnosed now. My mother's sibling died as a child. Now we understand better why. My parents were undiagnosed. They still don't even have an official diagnosis because they haven't gone through the evaluation. But I genetically tested them trying to find my child's answers. So we know now. They are now in their 60s and dealing with the damage to their bodies. And this affects our whole family, of course. Just some basic complications that they've had. My father had a very severe bleeding surgical complication. My mother had to have repeat spinal fusion surgeries, among just their day-to-day dealings with disability. My childhood growing up is marked by undiagnosis of neurodivergence and disability. What I explained to you earlier about generational trauma is my personal experience. And it extends, unfortunately, beyond the pattern of just my parents and their parents. It explains serious complications within my family of undiagnosed cousins. But there's also wins. Because of our diagnosis, one of my younger cousins was able to get an EDS diagnosis and got endometriosis treatment, and her life is so radically different now. But on the other hand, I have cousins that aren't diagnosed, and this week I had a younger cousin, 23, peak physical condition, young, healthy, vibrant. She ended up having emergency surgery this week, and she is okay because she had a vascular compression and a blood clot was dangerously close to her heart, and she survived. I still am actively releasing these things. Obviously, I'm not over it. It's very painful. for me in my own personal experience, extended pain in childhood led to a chain of events that led me to quit sports and other activities. I lost my community, my friends. I felt isolated. I felt other. I felt different for reasons related to both my disability as well as my neurotype differences. My symptoms spiraled, all the while in a chaotic environment with parents struggling with their advancing pain and difficulties of being undiagnosed and unsupported neurodivergence. I had very difficult family environments and traumas that caused intense chaos in my family. And I went through rounds of physical therapy that didn't help. And I remember the day my mom said, okay, well, we're not going to do this anymore because it's not healthy. I had very serious depression and I hid it. I was a remarkable student and talented at many things, and I withdrew. Children don't know how to be friends to another kid that's experiencing such deep pains that we experience emotionally or otherwise. I felt isolated within my family. I felt isolated within my friends and my community. And this serious depression and masking the anxiety that I felt led me to take my own life by the age of 14. And I remember the desire was to stop the pain. I just didn't want to exist. It wasn't that I hated myself. It was that I couldn't bear it anymore. And nobody understood. They put me in therapy. They couldn't understand me. I experienced things that I would now identify as neglect and abuse. And I'm still working through those things. And now my family is repairing these things. Even with great love, in the face of this kind of adversity, there is deep damage. I'm lucky I survived. And it took me years to stop dissociating and come back to this and heal, work through it. But truly, the pattern of making myself smaller at the convenience of others created a pattern of me not knowing how to face these stacking comorbidities as I went through life. I couldn't finish school. I became dependent upon, a particular job or marriage because it gave me enough security, but it wasn't healthy, right? I knew things weren't right. I had so many physical issues and I sought help and treatment, but I never got diagnosed with any of them early enough. It was years and years. And finally, I was diagnosed with things like lipedema, which is connective tissue disorder of fat, after having radical surgical interventions to try to lose weight. I had gastric bypass surgery, and now I'm dealing with severe nutrient deficiencies related to my inborn anemia that I could never repair now. And all I had was lipedema, and it's never going away. Dysautonomia, MCAS, painful menstruation. I went through multiple child losses and a traumatic childbirth with unnecessary interventions. My child was born after an induction for something called idiopathic excessive amniotic fluid. It's just because my uterus was stretchy. She was perfectly fine. Um, this list isn't even exhaustive, because I can't even begin to unpack the trauma if I want to finish recording this today. So I think I vomited enough. Shelli, it's your turn.
I didn't know it was, I don't know what to say. So, cool. I think it's important to get diagnosed because if you're asking the questions, you're looking for something. And so if you've already like made it to the threshold of a connective tissue disorder and you're wondering, should I step through it? Yes, because why make it all the way that far and then not step through it? And a lot of the kickback I get from people I've talked to is, well, it's not going to change anything. There's no cure. Or it's, why does it matter? Like we've been saying. And even if you don't get an official diagnosis from your doctor, you should still try to treat yourself as best you can without that official diagnosis. There are things you can do, like we've mentioned before. So my whole thing is, if you're going to do it, go all the way. So in my family, it was, I don't know a lot about my dad's side of the family. And that's likely due to the generational trauma of being an unsupported neurodivergent person and also not knowing it. And so the way that it seemed like problems were solved on my dad's side of the family is to never speak to that person again and get divorced, and then they're gone. So that doesn't really help a child growing up to like expect to have a conversation that's not going to end up in someone cutting you off, cutting you out of their life. I was always, one of my biggest fears was that was going to happen to me. On my mom's side of the family, everybody talked to everybody, but everybody had some like weird shit going on. Like my grandmother had these like weird, they were described as weird seizures and these spells, and she had problems with her vision and her bladder and her uterus, and she had a brain aneurysm in her 30s. But they never, she was survived. She got that brain surgery. She had a hysterectomy. She did end up going blind, and she lived to be 69, which honestly is longer than I thought. And so when my mom just turned 70, that was a big deal. But my grandmother's brother had a stroke in his 40s, and then he died in his 60s. Her sister's the only one that had any real longevity as far as that goes. On my papa's side, he lost his dad when he was like 11 years old. And then he, like other family members, there's just so many weird, sudden things that happen to people. But all of these things kept happening in my family, like strokes, weird seizures. My mom's brother, he died a few weeks after turning 57. Just none of this stuff made any sense. And so I decided that I needed to know. And the way it affected me was because I needed to know, and because I didn't know that I was neurodivergent, I would often annoy people with either my research into finding the answer or just wanting to talk about it some more so that I could actually process what I was experiencing. Because for me, I didn't know that I had delayed processing, not just of emotions, but of just about anything. And I also didn't know that my brain is so much faster than the rest of me. And my face might be making a face for something completely unrelated that's going on in my brain, but I didn't know that. Then you get smacked for that. If so it just causes all of these things. And now that I know why
Or the
I did
wires
this,
crossing. I'm sorry to interrupt. Like the processing confusion. Like you laugh at a funeral or
oh yeah,
or you get interrupted and we can't get back on track.
I am done. What about you, Tiffany?
It's very interesting to find community. Like was mentioned earlier, as far as like why it's important to get diagnosis, and you find your community and your support. Just hearing, not just here, but throughout the last seasons of both of your stories, it's heartbreaking but comforting, because a lot of like my own personal story I hear a lot in your guys' story, and the same with like the family history, and it's nice to have that feeling like you're not alone and you're not crazy and um it's just really nice to know. And we talked about my diagnosis story earlier this season, um so I don't want to like go rehash all that, but I think for me, like we said in today's episode, getting diagnosed, to me it was I matter, like everything that we've gone through, it matters, and it's got to count for something. Like my gram used to, like, I don't suffer without a purpose, so if she was trying to do something, like she didn't necessarily want to take the easy way out, just to get it done. Like there was a purpose behind everything. And getting that diagnosis on paper, to me, is so important, not just for our own care, but like you said, for the community. So all this misunderstanding of like it's a rare disease, to me that's why it's so critical to have that diagnosis on paper, because then you're counted. And maybe instead of 1 in 5,000, all of a sudden it's like, oh no, it's actually 1 in 1,000, 1 in 500, 1 in 200. We'll get there when we get there. But just showing up, just like I was adamant when I mentioned earlier with drug-induced lupus, and they wrote it off as fibromyalgia. And I had asked my new rheumatologist that I saw, that was different from the first two I saw, about it. And she was kind of shocked that it to her was very glaringly a drug-induced lupus, not discounting fibromyalgia, not discounting Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, but lab work alone was very, like, she's like, like, this is drug-induced lupus. And it, because of that sense of like honesty and transparency, in my head, I'm like, that has to be reported, because that was one of the reasons it was written off in the beginning, was because it was quote unquote unlikely that the medicine I was on was causing drug-induced lupus. Like it was very uncommon. It was like a rare instance. And I'm like, but nothing is rare with me. Like all of these rare things.
I have those things. Those things happen.
Like, and I'm not, and like, it's not trying to feel like the whole, I'm special. Like, it's not that. It's just how many more rare things statistically is one person lucky enough to get before we realize they're not rare. And then I had this thought of like, is it not being reported because of some shady medical stuff where we don't want to say that there's more incidences of the most popular biologic medication that is making so much money because of how ungodly expensive this medication was. Like I can't even begin to say how much it is without insurance. You know, it was hundreds, over $100,000. I'm like, I would just die. Like, but then in turn, it made me sick, you know, and I'm not saying that's the case for everyone. However, I think had I known some things earlier and known how my body processes things differently, I would have been more aware. And my doctors and medical team would have been more aware to be more open to properly interpreting the signals that my body was giving instead of attributing it to anxiety and the pandemic stress.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
shit.
So you guys mentioned some, some aspects of our personal experience that are the more positive side. So like, what are the fruits of your labor that you have seen, like in the next generation? Because we are the Bendy Mommas. We have children. What's different?
Who goes?
You go, Shelli. I think we have a very good example. What did we talk about this morning with one of your children? Adults.
I don't know.
Carolyn's scholarship.
Oh, what does that have to do with EDS?
So, like, I know it doesn't have anything directly to do with EDS, but I'm just going to say at 18, having just graduated high school, I was already in burnout. I wasn't diagnosed. I didn't have any accommodations or tools. And the idea of going to college was already terrifying. She's thrived, got multiple scholarships,
Yeah.
knows who she is. I've met this adult, young adult. There's so much more hope, I think, in our children not having an identity, and support and accommodation.
Yeah, I mean, the two of us went through a lot together because 2020 to 2022 was rough for both of us at the same time. Yeah, I would say that would be my biggest accomplishment, I guess. The thing I'm most proud of is that obviously I I definitely passed on some kinds of trauma for sure, that at least this like one bit of the unknown has been resolved. And so
And also we live our lives differently now.
yeah, I think doing that gives permission, like just that not giving permission sounds, I'm living my life differently and authentically, and so
it sets a different pattern.
yeah, but matching energy, right? So like my energy changed, and so did everybody else's, but also like as their energy changes, it's
So I'm going to say this as an outsider perspective of Shelli's family. I've been in their home and it's deeply changed to accommodate things like disability, family gathering, neurodivergence, and the way they speak to each other and fill in the gaps and accommodate and interact is what I wish I had had as a child. And so like it's not so obvious to you when you're in the thick of it and you're like, I know I do these things for my child, but to see that in someone else, it's not, I don't have as much of an emotional attachment to watching you and your family interact as I do my own. And you were diagnosed as an adult not that long ago, and look at all these changes you've made in your life in terms of work, um, your hobbies, what you want to do with your time, how you contribute to your community, how you raise your children, is different than what, we did, our experience growing up, I mean. And Carolyn is like an embodied human adult already. They know who they are.
Yeah.
They have their goals. They aren't, I'm sure they have apprehensions because everyone does, but they seem so self-assured and embodied in their identity as I am disabled. I am a little bit neurospicy, but this is me and I can do this and I'm accomplishing great things. And I reflect on my child's younger. Evelyn is just going into 8th grade, but same thing. She speaks up for herself. She self-assuredly says things just very matter of fact, what she needs. She doesn't mask. And that's what I see is different in this next generation. They're not masking their disability. And so they have this space of being more authentically themselves and thriving. And like, they're already more complete little adults. Whereas we had to wait till our 40s.
Well, I would say yes, but also like you were describing how when you went away to school, you were scared. Like you had this level of about it.
I was scared, but I was also so excited to be away from my family.
Yeah. I didn't think twice about it. I'd always kind of been like a little mom, as it were. So, which by the way, that's a sign.
That's a thing.
I mean, that's classic firstborn daughter energy right there is what that is.
Very fair. Yeah. Worry about everybody else.
So yeah, I don't know. I think being around Evie in March, like I think what I'm trying to say with regards to that is she definitely was very good at advocating for herself when she needed things, when she did it. My problem, I found I struggle my own self to interact with youngins who are not my progeny, who are unmasked like that.
Who are like us.
Right, because I'm not used to it. I'm not used to a 13-year-old being able to say, and I don't like, I wasn't mad about it. It's just, I'm not used to that level of, what is the word I'm looking for? There's a word, the Germans probably have a word for this.
They have a word, I'm sure. It's like 16 syllables. But I mean, it's true. She stresses me out too. But every time I get a little perturbed by that, I'm like, no, this is okay because I wasn't given this. And then
I think what makes me mad though is I sometimes respond like my mom would have
in our patterns. Yeah.
Right. But I don't want to.
Our tismy things trigger the other's tismy things, right?
Yeah.
And it's so funny, but it isn't when it's happening.
Well, right. Because I'm very much, I'm definitely that type that was like, if a sound stops, I notice. And if if I'm very, very audio sensitive.
And so is she. Severe misophonia.
And so,
yeah.
If I hear it and I haven't, like, that's why one of the things that I've done that's different, I actively started removing myself from situations where I either don't need to know what's going on or I know too much about what's going on. And I'm like, so I protect that part of me.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually will sometimes shut out external stuff, which seems weird because people like to say autistic folks are already like turned within, but that's
Just
just
me
the
personally, I have a hard time filtering, even with effort. So it's like I
filtering
overcorrect
what
or
you want to
undercorrect.
say.
No, like filtering external stimuli, whether it be auditory or
Right.
whatever.
So,
it is. Yeah.
right. But what's really annoying is like earbuds hurt me. Headphones I can only wear for X amount of time. So it's like, it sucks because even though there are accommodations for me to like stay in the room, I can only do that for a certain amount of time until I have to like
They're not,
go
yeah, they're
somewhere
not
else.
ideal and sustainable. Yeah. We have
Right,
to pace
because
ourselves.
right. But I can't not have sound. Like I need, like when we were texting this morning and I was like, I need to dance around a little bit, and
Mhm.
I have to do that with headphones on because other people are sleeping, and
Yeah.
that's all. It's little things like that. But I don't have FOMO anymore, really, generally, because a lot of times I like forced myself to go do things because I didn't want people to be like, she never goes anywhere.
Mhm.
And now it's like, well, it's exhausting to go anywhere.
Right. I try to do the things, but I also try to pace myself in doing the things. And I try to accommodate myself in doing the things by, doing them with a friend or when it's less busy or, just whatever. But so like I've been able to share the experiences of life with my daughter with accommodations, right? And like teacher pacing, or she sees us model things like using adaptive equipment, whereas I had modeled to me shaming my grandmother for not being able to stand up straight or using a walker or having medical differences.
I had to ask Carolyn to get my cane out of their car. It's like, can I have that back?
She
Let's get
took it.
you your
Yeah.
own. So that, yes, there's definitely there's a shift for sure.
I think as I was expressing my history, because it's so painful, it sounds very negative. But the point of this is the diagnosis is the closing of a chapter.
Yeah.
There was the before, and this is the after. So thank you guys so much for, sharing some of your stories with everybody today. I think it's time we wrapped up this episode.
So thank you so much for listening to the Hacking Hypermobility podcast today.
We appreciate you spending some time with us. And if I leave you with anything today after this episode, please know that a proper diagnosis is essential to improving your overall health and quality of life that you deserve.
Also, if any of these topics sparked ideas or questions you would like to hear discussed, please send us a message to our email at info@hackinghypermobility.com or tag us in the socials.
And please take a minute to share the podcast or follow or leave us a review on the platform where you are listening or watching. It helps us a lot if you interact.
Yes. And we have the ability to get supporters. So we're working out the best way for you to support us. But right now, the easiest way is to look at the link wherever you're watching right now, and it says support us. So click on that and it will take you to all kinds of options. And soon we're going to have items in our shop. We'll tell you more about that while we're at the conference, I think. Maybe.
And a quick reminder, this information provided in the podcast episode is for educational purposes only and should not be considered as medical advice. Consult with a healthcare professional for personalized guidance on managing your health. Thanks again for listening.
Have a great day, zebras. We're wishing you healthy hypermobility. Bye.